All right, when last we left, we had been discussing Greece and talking about the United Kingdom under Alexander the Great. I have had some good compliments out of the study here. I hope that it is beneficial to you. I appreciate all those who made a comment about it. I told one lady that had made a comment, I said, well, I begin to wonder sometimes if anybody even cares about listening to it or not, but a good pat on the back like that always helps. Makes you know that somebody is interested in it as well. It's very fascinating stuff when we go through, and we're going to be looking into some stuff today leading up to what's going to help us when we begin to talk about like Herod. We're going to be moving again into Rome. We're not quite there yet. When you go back to Daniel, again in the colossal image, the head of gold, the shoulders and arms of silver, the thighs of brass, and then the feet there of iron that we look at, or the legs of iron, the thighs of brass, and the legs and feet of iron and clay. Looking at that, noticing the kingdoms that were going to come about, and we're now into that lower section where we're talking about Greece. Right, the Greeks. Alexander the Great. Tyler Moss asked a good question last week as we were leaving, and I failed to call him and let him know, but it was 7 months is all it took Alexander, which I say that's still 7 months is a while, but to push Tyre off into the sea to build the causeway over to the island of Tyre, it was only 7 months is how long his army took to do that, which was still an amazing feat. So 7 months, again, as we made. He didn't have a dozer to do that. But interestingly, we've looked at Alexander the Great, and now we're going to notice, again, the divided kingdom within Alexander the Great's kingdom. Now, when we look at these things through Scripture, we're going to note here in just a moment that it talks about there being 4 kingdoms or 4 horns or 4 entities coming up out of this, but initially it's going to be 7, because what we find is here on our slide on the board that with the death of Alexander there was no clear heir to the throne, so he did not have a child that he could leave this to. And he says when asked to whom he would leave his kingdom, he replied, to the strongest. So amazing. Now I'm going to go through these slowly to allow you. There's only really 2 that we're going to be discussing as far as what's important to the student of the Bible, but we got to mention them all. So I will try to go slow and give you time to take notes to write these individuals down. But again, essentially, you're going to have 7 men of this massive nation, right? This massive empire that Alexander the Great has acquired. We're going to have one named Ptolemy. So the P is silent. Ptolemy, the subordinate commander and bodyguard of Alexander. So we're going to look at this man and the area in which he took. So he's going to take the region of Egypt. And I'm going to show you a map here in just a moment of what we're looking at. So this man Ptolemy. So a lot of these individuals were very close to Alexander. A lot of them generals, bodyguards, advisors, that they are going to see the opportunity. And like it is with Rome, what we'll see when we get into Rome is whoever controls the army a lot of times becomes the man in charge. If you can control the army, as we saw with the Caesars, when we get into that, they are the ones that generally sway the outcome of how things are going to go. So Ptolemy, again, he's a commander, he's a bodyguard, and he's going to take the area of Egypt. And now, again, we'll show on the map, it's actually going to come up and get into the Canaan land, as we will see in just a moment. So I'm going to try to, again, go slow, make sure everybody's got these slides. I will try to, well, I can do one of 2 things. I've got some more detailed notes I can give you if you like, or I can print these out either way. But as always, if you want me to, I'll email you. If you'll just give me your email address, I will give you all of these PowerPoints that you need. I just need your email address is all, and I can give you all of these. All right, we're going to try to go on. If you miss it, I apologize. All right. Next commander that's going to find is Menes, Alexander's royal secretary. So again, these men are very close to Alexander. He is going to take Cappadocia and Paphlagonia. Got to slow down and say it in my head. Paphlagonia. We'll see it all. Again, we'll show kind of some of this stuff on the map. Some of these names you think, well, I've never even heard of these places. Again, some of these men are not important. It's important for history, but it's not important for us in Bible class. Cappadocia, Paphlagonia. All right. I try to go slow, but when I stand in silence, it makes me think. So Again, he's one that you're not really going to have to be concerned about either. All right. Lysimachus, he's a bodyguard of Alexander. He's going to take Thrace. So again, this idea, he was a young man, Alexander, 33 years old when he died. He didn't really have an heir. Again, many of us thinking just getting into the age where your career essentially would begin oftentimes, but this man dying, I think somebody asked me that too. I think they think he may have died of alcohol poisoning, may have been the cause of death. Obviously, the speculation that maybe he was murdered, things like that, but I don't think that was the case. He may have been sick. Again, you got to think of the time frame of this, that he may have been a disease that they didn't know about, and they just couldn't treat it, and he died of that. But nonetheless, again, it is a brilliant quote that the whole world could not contain him, but yet a 6-foot coffin could, because he was trying to conquer the whole world. All right. Now this man here, Seleucus, it's not him particularly, but it's going to be this line. So again, we heard the man named Ptolemy. Ptolemy and Seleucus are going to be the line of individuals that we're really going to have to be paying attention to. So Seleucus, he's a subordinate commander. Now he's going to take Syria and Babylon. So again, if you use your mind's eye and visualize that map, Syria, Babylon, if you're looking at it, to me, over here in the east, South Asia, that kind of area, India, coming in, taking that land, Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers there. He's going to take control of all of that. So he's really the one we're really going to get into here in just a moment. All right. Antigonus, a subordinate commander. He'll take Lycia, Pamphylia, and Phrygia. So again, these nations, they're just going to, and essentially it's the amount of land, the amount of troops that these individuals can control and they can kind of gather for themselves. Again, it wasn't deeded out in any such way. They just fought over it and came out on the top. So Lycia, Pamphylia, and Phrygia. Places they're going to get. Again, these individuals like this, essentially they're not going to last very long in their rule. They kind of started out at 7. Daniel's going to prophesy that there will be 4, and we'll look at them here in just a minute, the ones that stay strong. But they're not going to all make it as this fight for the throne. All right, Antipater, a lifelong friend of Alexander. So he's going to stay in Macedonia, Greece, that Greek area. There, he's going to stay right there. And again, a friend, these individuals are closely related to him. And again, these divisions of this massive empire. So he stays in Macedonia. I think we got one more here, but I'll wait just a little bit. We'll get rolling again here in just a minute. I didn't want to put too much on there and go from that. So. The last one, Cassander. He's the son of Antipater, and he's going to take Caria. Not Coria, Caria. And when you get this, I'll show you a map on the next slide here to kind of show you the vastness of this empire, of what they're holding. Now again, think, that's a lot. And it was. These men, it's important for history standpoint, but for the Bible student, we're going to get rolling in on that here and look at the influence that these men had on the Jews. Because again, we're noticing at this time, it's the time between the Testaments. So Ezra and Nehemiah, they came back to Jerusalem. They're building the temple. They're trying to rebuild it. It wasn't like the same temple that didn't have its former glory as you're studying in Sunday morning. I'm not sure where you are at in those lessons, but again, we're looking at that. And now they have the outside influence. Again, Cyrus from Persia, he has let them go back home, has the Cyrus cylinder. They're able to go back home. But now we have Greece coming in on top of them. We talked about it last week. Alexander the Great was going to make Jerusalem a example, and he ends up not going and sacking that city. And then we find that the men coming in after him are going to be the ones. So here's the map. So you'll kind of see this Ptolemy area is down here in Egypt. So it goes from Alexandria on up, and you can kind of see Sidon, Tyre and Sidon. So that's going to be right there in the Palestine area, the land of Canaan, where the Jews are going to be. Jerusalem being kind of right up in there. But anyway, this yellow is going to be the Seleucid Empire. So he's going to have the most of it there. And that's going to be influential. There is Syria, Mesopotamia, going on out, Babylon being down in here. So not so much worried about all the area back off to Asia, but again, importantly, Syria and these individuals coming in like that. So it's amazing that we find these individuals, and again, we're going to go now here to Daniel, and we're going to look, if you have your Bibles there handy, you can look in these passages. But again, he prophesied 3 centuries earlier. So again, 607, 605, somewhere in that area, we have Daniel being carried away into Babylonian captivity. And what we find is he is prophesying during this time about events that were going to be happening around 300 BC. So almost 300 years earlier, Daniel is going to tell them it's exactly what's going to happen. So when you read passages like this, notice in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 6, after this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given unto it. So when you read these passages, again, when you look at this apocalyptic language in Daniel, and again, we get wound up on Daniel, and we get wound up in Revelation because we're trying to put something into this place. You'll hear me refer to exegeting passages, that is drawing out the passage, what the passage said. We do not want to eisegete. Eisegete means I'm putting into the passage. I'm looking at something today, and I'm reading Daniel chapter 7, verse 6, and I'm trying to think of what 4 nations could be raising up today, and that's not what we're trying to do. What we find here, again, the 4. Now, you'll see at the bottom on the screen here, Antipater, Emmaus, and Antigonus, they all died right there pretty quickly. So these individuals kind of got out of the way. So what we find are the 4 that are left, that is prophesied about in Daniel. Not only in Daniel 7, but we also read that in Daniel chapter 8 and verse 8, therefore the he-goat, we said that this was Alexander, again, waxed very great. And when he was strong, so again, right there in the height of his youth, 33 years old, when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. So what we see is these nations, these kingdoms going out, and that they're going to be doing this. And again, when you read Daniel 11, noticing there in verse 4, it reads the same way. So when you read these passages of Daniel, again, we like to read the accounts of Daniel in the lion's den, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the Hebrew youths. We like to read about them in the fiery furnace. We teach about those things, but sometimes the back half of Daniel we kind of stray from, but this is what he's talking about. Daniel 11 and verse 4. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. So again, not to his offspring, nor according to his dominion, which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. So we find that this kingdom is going to do just like Daniel prophesied 300 years earlier. So amazing. Now, when you look in Daniel chapter 11, just in reference there, when you're looking at these kingdoms, you'll find there in verse 5 that the king of the south, so you go back to that map, I'll go back to that slide, but when you look in the kingdom of the south, that's Ptolemy. So we say, all right, so the king of the south is Ptolemy. So when he's talking about that, prophesying about this nation, and then in Daniel chapter 11, verse 6, he says, and the end of the years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north. So the king of the north is the Seleucids, and make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. That's speaking about the marriage arrangement between that of Seleucid and Ptolemy. So we're going to see that these kingdoms are going to be trying to work it out there. They're going to try to do these. Again, we see that from the ancient times, that the marriages were designed to make allies out of other nations. All right? So when you read the prophecies of Daniel, again, if we keep these things in mind, it plays out just like history has designed it, or as history has shown us, the prophecies are accurate. All right, so again, for the Bible student, what we want to look at right here is Ptolemy, Philadelphus, Again, we spoke about that last Sunday. When you read in the Greek translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew to Greek, Alexander was pressing the Greek culture. Hellenism is what it's typically called. Hellenism is what they refer to that as, the Greek culture. And as we looked on our map, all the way down into Alexandria, they had this vast library. And they said, well, we've got a Hebrew the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. Again, the New Testament's not written yet. So they said, we have the Hebrew Bible, and we want to translate that into Greek because we have people that speak Greek now, a very common language, and we need it translated. So again, the Septuagint or the LXX, meaning the 70 translators that had a part in translating that Hebrew. They were scholars of the Hebrew language, scholars of the Greek language, and they translated that Bible for them. So when Jesus reads in the Gospels, when he's reading from the Bible, from the scrolls, he's reading from the Septuagint. He was speaking in Greek. Anyway, there's one more language, Arabic. They would speak in Arabic. Greek was kind of the money, the language of the commerce. Most people spoke Greek. You had some individuals with Hebrew, but typically those were more like religious people that would speak Hebrew and Aramaic. They would also speak that language a little bit as well. But if you ever have read your King James Bible, and I don't know about the other translations, but I know the King James like that, you'll read a passage and it will read a little differently than the Old Testament verse that it's referencing, is because, again, your King James Version was translated from Hebrew, and they translated that from Greek, so the wording is off a little bit like that. So if you say, well, it's contradicting itself, no, just different translations, that's all. So that's what Ptolemy's brought us, so that's important for them. Now, here's the guy that we're going to talk about here, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV. He is such a interesting character in the Bible. Antiochus IV. So again, we don't have the time to really get down into the different lines that we're going down through here. He's going to come from the Seleucid Empire, so that of Syria. A man named Antiochus IV. He would call himself Epiphanes, or the Exalted One, but the Jews would call him Epimanes, or the Madman. And we're going to see why he was a madman here in just a moment. It's a great text to study. And I'll try to make sure we're out of here on time. I'll try not to go too far, but it's a good study. Rolling in through this. All right, so Antiochus IV. Antiochus Epiphanes is sometimes what he's referred to as. Now, when you go to Daniel chapter 8 and verse 9, we read there in verse 8, therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. So again, we see that Alexander's kingdom is broken. There's 4 notable ones that come out. But notice verse 9. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. So again, this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. So he's going to go to the south, and that's going to be the Ptolemy area, that he's going to go down into Egypt. He's going to go to the east, that of Persia, and the pleasant land being of Judea. So Antiochus Epiphanes is really going to stretch his arm out and be this ruthless leader. When you read about him again in Daniel chapter 11, some of those places when you're reading about this individual, talking about how wicked this man would be, he's coming. Now again, Daniel is prophesying these things, talking about that this destruction is coming. So here's one of the things in which he did. There, I'll stay just a minute, make sure you got that. The southeast, the pleasant land, he's expanding his kingdom, but Antiochus Epiphanes is going to do some very vile things. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 32, it's worth noting that Daniel says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Now, quickly, I do not endorse the Apocrypha. Those are the hidden books that they said were written. They're not in the canon. They were not included in the canon. The Jewish historians, all Jewish culture says no, the Apocrypha was not given in with this. These were stories that were happening after. And 1st and 2nd Maccabees, though it's not a good, it's a good read in the sense of history. So if you really want to know about the Maccabean revolt and the Jewish revolt, I would encourage you to maybe read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, only as historical supplements. You can read Josephus and other Jewish historians, but the Maccabees are, 1st and 2nd Maccabees are a good historical. They're not inspired. They're not inspired. The Apocrypha is not inspired. I want you to make sure you understand that. It's only for history purposes. As Brother Cates taught us, you can rip those 2 books out, throw the rest in the garbage. It's useless. But we can look at this as history. So, one of the things that Antiochus Epiphanes did was he ordered all of the Jews in Judea to sacrifice swine on the altar. So again, for the Bible student, we understand that if you're in the temple and you have an altar of Zeus there, you are to sacrifice a pig and put it on that altar. You see the disdain you'd have to have for a group of individuals to say, well, I know you're a Jew and you don't eat pork and you don't touch swine, but you're going to sacrifice this in your temple to Zeus. So the reason, again, this was not just the only thing, but this was probably one of the bigger things that he did, was that he really spoke against God and was doing all of these things in this area of these Maccabeans. Now, this town called Modin, which was 20 miles west by northwest of Jerusalem, there was a priest there, and Mattathias is, I'll give you a slide, or it says it there, in the name of Mattathias. So there's a priest there in Modin, and he's going to have 5 sons, and he's going to be practicing, he's a practicing Jew, he's going to be trying to do what God commands him to do, but Antiochus Epiphanes' representative is going to come to that area, again, that empire. He says, I'm going to make sure y'all are all doing everything that I say you're going to do. Now, what he says, or what happens is, when you read this, that a representative comes down, and in the temple that Mattathias is in, he said, you're going to sacrifice this pig on this altar. And he says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not about to desecrate this by offering this pig on the altar. And he refuses to do that. But another priest that was there with him is essentially like, okay, well, I'll do it. If you want me to sacrifice this pig, I'll do that. And it enrages Mattathias, so he ends up killing the priest, and he ends up killing the representative. He pulls down the altar of Zeus. This is going to begin the Maccabean revolt. So maybe you have heard that name before, the Maccabees. So they're going to lead these Jewish, essentially it's just a militia of Jews that are going to fight against the Seleucid army, fight against Antiochus Epiphanes. So if you want more information on that, I can get it for you, or look it up there on your free time. But noticing that Mattathias, he's going to lead this, and he's going to have 5 sons, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. And these guys are going to essentially continue on with this revolt. But Mattathias is kind of an older man when this happens. He was kind of like, you've pushed me too far. I'm not going to be pushed anymore. I don't like this. You're going against what we believe. Our beliefs are being threatened. I'm not going to continue on through this. And so he said, all right, I'm going to put it into it. So John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. Now, let's look at this. Mattathias, he's going to die in 166. So here's our time stamp, if you will. Daniel is carried away in 1600. He's, again, 607, 605. He's carried away into Babylonian captivity. He's prophesying about these events that are going to happen around 300. Alexander the Great comes in. But now, after these kingdoms have been divided, around 166 is going to be when this revolt begins to happen. So, he's going to leave in the hands of his son Simon. He's going to typically be called the guide, and then Judas Maccabeus, the hammer. So I know Tyler Miles and I laughed about that. Sometimes he talks about it. He asked me, is he going to bring the hammer down in services? So Judas Maccabeus, the hammer. He said that was his name. And Judas Maccabeus was a great general for this militia. So essentially what's going to happen here at the close of our study is you're going to have several years of the Jews fighting against the Seleucid army. They're going to keep bringing more people down. Interestingly enough, the Seleucids found out that they would not fight on the Sabbath day, and they ended up killing very many of the Jews. So they kind of had to make a decision, and they said, if we keep practicing the Sabbath, we're going to be wiped out entirely because they already know we're not going to do anything on the Sabbath. So they decided amongst themselves that they would still fight on the Sabbath, though they knew they didn't, I guess, need to. I don't know how they really justified that in their mind. But nonetheless, they fought even through on the Sabbath days. Now, here's what we're going to get to, and this would be a good place to end. So Judas recaptures Jerusalem. So we have the temple, you have the altar of Zeus there, all this defilement that's going to be talking about. Now that's important. They brought all of these things into the temple, the altar of Zeus, and they sacrificed a swine on this. Now quickly, go with me to Matthew chapter 24. So let's button this up right here. Now again, let's go to Matthew chapter 24. So this is good. We'll end on this. If the Seleucids, right, and these men, these Syrians, they're bringing these unregulated things into the temple. They've got an altar set up for Zeus. They're sacrificing swine. Again, those who are present in our Wednesday night class through Exodus or Leviticus, Deuteronomy, right? You're not even supposed to touch a swine. But when you go to Matthew chapter 24, notice what is said. And many times we look at this as this doomsday, Antichrist, Jesus is coming back, you've got to get ready. Notice in verse 15 of what he's writing, what Jesus is saying, when ye therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. What Jesus is talking about here in Matthew 24, though many people look at Matthew 24 as this Antichrist about to come, no, he's talking about these individuals that are going to defile the temple. And what we find is that the Roman army did just that. Now again, verse 16, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. You can go to Mark's account, you can go to Luke's account of this. It's very clear when these armies come up against this, they're going to defile the temple, right? They go into the holies of holies. They go in here. Titus, when he eventually destroys that temple, the soldiers are in there. He's really wanting to let the temple stand, but the soldiers catch fire to it. The gold begins to melt down in the cracks. I think I've talked about that. That's why they push all the stones down to get the gold that melted in between there. So no stone is left upon another. That's what Christ is talking about. The destruction of Jerusalem there in AD 70. So when you read about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, you're talking about this stuff that was happening with Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, or Antiochus the fourth, Antiochus Epiphanes, not some futuristic Antichrist. That's not what he's talking about. All right, so to finish up here. Now, they go in and they recapture the temple. Again, going back to the Maccabees, they recapture the temple, and what they do is they're trying to dedicate the temple. We remember the candle stand. Typically, they call that today the menorah. So they have this candle stand that was given by the divine instructions to build this candle stand. And they're trying to find the oil to light the candle, and what they scrounge up is enough oil to let the candle, they think, well, it'll burn for about a day and then that'll be it. So they're rededicating this temple the way the Jews were supposed to do this. Now, instead of burning just one day, the oil burned for 8 nights. So when you read in the New Testament about the Feast of Dedication, or if you have a friend or know someone that celebrates Hanukkah, the Jews that celebrate Hanukkah, this is it. 8 nights is what that oil ended up burning. So they said, all right, it's only going to burn a night. But they thought it was a miracle that they were able to retake Jerusalem. And by God's hand, and no doubt God probably had a hand in that. And what they say is, well, it burned for 8 nights. So when you see Jewish people worshiping Hanukkah today, it's 8 nights. And that's why. It's because that's how long the oil burned. And it goes all the way back to the Maccabean revolt. And what we find is, again, the Feast of Dedication, when you read about that in the first century, then they ended up calling it Hanukkah later on. So we got the top of the hour. They've dismissed from class. Does anybody have anything on that I've talked about there today? I know that was kind of a lot, especially toward the end. Again, you're welcome to these slides. You're welcome to the PowerPoint. I'll email it to you, whatever you need. Going forward, we're going to get into some of the offspring of these Maccabeans, and we're going to get into a man named John Hyrcanus. We're going to get into Herod the Great. All of that getting into the Edomians. You might remember we talked about that some time back. You're going to get into those type of individuals, and we're going to look at the diverse beasts, or that of Rome, here momentarily. All right, any questions or comments there? All right, well, very good.